Welcome everyone to our DSU online workshop, Mental Health First Aid for your online students. And thank you for attending. It's good to see you all. We'll also be recording this, so if you want to refer to it later, you can. I'm pleased to welcome our facilitator for today's workshop, Jamy Dahle. Jamy will show us some resources and evidence-based practices to help us identify and respond to our students who might be facing mental health challenges, and especially those online students that we can't really see. Just a quick intro for Jamy. She is currently serving as the Assistant Director of the Booth Wellness Center and is a licensed clinical social worker. Jamy graduated from Eastern Washington University in 2006 with a master's degree in social work. And in her role here at DSU, her focus is on providing mental health services as well as health education and prevention of mental illness at the collegiate level. She is a suicide prevention trainer using the evidence-based QPR model. She has worked in outpatient treatment settings in both direct practice, administration, and outreach. Prior to becoming a therapist, Jamy worked in the judicial system with at-risk youth. Jamy provides individuals, couples, family, and group therapy, as well as plans and coordinates and implements wellness events and presentations on DSU campus. Jamy is a busy woman right now, and we're so grateful that she has taken the time to share with us some of her expertise to help us help our students. So we'll go ahead and turn the rest of the time over to Jamy to lead our discussion about mental health first aid for your online students.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Terry. So as we go through today's discussion, I want you first of all and foremost to know that this can be as interactive as you would like it to be. So if you have questions, concerns, situations you want to bring up, don't hesitate to interrupt me and we can talk about those. I do have a PowerPoint that we'll be going through. We'll have some information regarding statistics of youth, young adults, and mental health. We'll talk about some warning signs, stressors, and then ways that students can help improve their mental health as ways that you can help reach out to your students. We do know it is unique, as Terry said. Our students, youth in general, people in general are really struggling with mental health right now. We've had a significant decline in mental health and as well as suicidal ideation. And we add an extra kind of barrier or challenge is when you're doing remote teaching, because you don't have that direct access to your student face to face, or maybe you don't have the same body language observations, you don't have that same connection with the student where they maybe reach out to you and let you know, hey, I'm struggling. So there are some unique challenges and barriers to the remote teaching, which we also know remote teaching is awesome. There's lots of benefits to remote teaching too. I'm actually teaching a course this semester, FSHD 3000. It's called Death and Dying, Life and Living. So it's a really heavy subject, doing it complete remote. And so that's something for me that I've had to be aware of as an instructor, that I need to be checking in with the students on a regular basis on their mental health, right? So we'll talk about how we can do that as well. Before we get started, does anybody have any questions?
And we're ready for you to share your screen anytime you're ready. So.
Got it. Let me go from current from beginning. Get one more thing. Okay, I have your video panel on the side. So if you see kind of a grayed out area, that's just the video panel, but I'll move that around as we go throughout the presentation. So when we're looking at mental health in general and mental health conditions, it's important to recognize the prevalence of them. So 1 in 5 Americans have a mental health illness. And what we know is 75% of those are diagnosed by the age of 24. A large percentage of those diagnoses come from the age of 18 to 24 specifically. And so we're working with students in this age bracket where their manifestation of those mental health disorders are coming out. There's a lot of questions as to why, right, this age bracket is that happening. And there's so many influential factors at that for that question. We do know that 30% of college students have reported difficulty in functioning due to mental health concerns. And suicide is the leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds. So definitely concerning age bracket in regards to just general mental health. This is something that we've done at Dixie State University. We do a suicide prevention week based upon some surveys we've done and needs of our students. And so our most recent Achanacha survey we completed, which stands for American College Health Association National Health Assessment, looking at student mental health, this is what we came up with. 45% of our surveyed students met the criteria for depressive disorder. So they weren't given this diagnosis by a clinician. It was based upon their responses to a survey, and they met the criteria. 38% of our students met the criteria for having a diagnosable anxiety disorder. 26% of our students engaged in non-suicidal self-injurious behavior. So non-suicidal self-injurious behavior is cutting, burning, any type of destruction to the body. 20% of our students had experienced suicidal ideation in the prior year. And 85% of our students surveyed reported that mental health and emotional difficulties impaired their ability to perform academically. That to me, I mean, all this to me is alarming and concerning with our students. When we look at 85% of our students said that their mental health impacted their ability to be academically successful. That's really, we're seeing that in the classrooms, right? You're seeing that as you're interacting with your students. So this is just a little follow-up on that with this survey to break it down more particular in regards to suicide specifically. This was our survey from 2019, but we had 1,310 DSU students who seriously considered suicide in the preceding 12 months. And when we talk about like considering suicide, that is very intense thought of, planning of, versus just like, I wish I could go to sleep and not wake up. There's a lot of planning behind this where they're really high risk. And then we had 301 students who actually attempted to die by suicide. And so when we look at our numbers of actual suicide, I couldn't give you a number. People always ask that, well, how many students have died by suicide? We know on average, at least one student at DSU dies by suicide per year. It's probably more than that. And that may be because a student who just kind of disappears from the university, we may not know that they actually died by suicide. And since I've been here over the last 5 years, we've had approximately one faculty or staff that has died by suicide since I've been here as well. So this is really common amongst our campus. You all probably have been impacted by this as well.
Now, Jamie, these numbers in front of us are 2019, right?
Yes. So these numbers right here are 2019. The slide prior, these numbers are from 2021. Is what these are. So I don't have the most recent suicide numbers from 2021. So those are 2019, but these are 2021.
Thank you.
Jamie, I had a quick comment. I know of a DSU student because I know his family. They live in my neighborhood, who committed suicide just this year with 2022. And yet I don't think, unless you knew the family, you wouldn't know about this suicide because I didn't see it anywhere in the news. It's not been made public. And so it's interesting. I think there probably are more suicides that happen that without us knowing.
Yeah, the ones, Terry, you're right on with that. The ones that we generally know about, or if it's a student who's died on campus. This was prior to my time. There was a student who had killed himself in a restroom on campus. So that we become aware of. Or if they die in campus housing, right, by suicide. Those ones we for sure know of. Other ones, like you said, there are many that we don't know of that, yeah, they disappear from campus, and we don't know why. Did they just decide to go to another college? Did they decide that they just were no longer interested in pursuing higher education, or did something more significant happen? Yeah, and when we talk about suicides too, there is nothing wrong with sharing that someone died by suicide. There is this misconception that we think there's somebody died by suicide, we don't share that and we don't talk about it. And that actually feeds into the stigma of suicide and that it's a shameful behavior. We do also know that if someone dies by suicide, we should treat it just the same as if we had a student by any other means. So an example would be if a student died in a car accident and we sent out an announcement and we offered grief support for the student that died in a car accident, we should do exactly the same for a student that died by suicide. We should put out an announcement, and we should offer grief support. We shouldn't do more or less for either. And that's something that a lot of the research shows us. So if you do more for a student that died by suicide, when we talk about the contagion effect of suicide, it actually could kind of create some additional risk of suicide for individuals. And if we do less for someone that died by suicide, then we're stigmatizing suicide. Yeah, I like this. I mean, this sounds like negative, but I really like it when you look at an obituary. I'm an obituary reader, and I really like it when it is put in there that someone died by suicide, or someone died of an overdose, or someone died from a terminal illness, just because I think that it really takes away some of that stigma that people are struggling and people do die by suicide and people do die by overdoses. All right, so when we look at our students, there are many factors that impact their mental health. We know that, like, when we're looking specifically at our freshman students that are coming in, they have a lot that they're experiencing, right? So they're coming in super excited for college, but they're not only adjusting to college life, they're adjusting to roommates, like in the sense of like roommates, how to like cook my own food, how to do my own laundry, how to wash, buy my own groceries, how to manage like my roommate conflicts, how to deal with homesickness. And then plus all that, how do I like make myself get up on time to get to class? How do I like manage my own schedule? How do I prioritize homework versus friends? And so there's this huge transition that happens with our freshman students that we find, I would say, at least the Wellness Center, there are students that struggle the most, at least initially. We call it just our first semester freshman fall, the FFFs, and it's just like we just brace for like an influx of freshmen. Last fall, we had, I think it was approximately 14 students that were hospitalized from our office for suicidal ideation. Rewind before that, on average, we have, I don't know, 1 to maybe 4 a semester. And so we had a huge influx, and the majority of those were our freshman students. So stressors that really impact our students' mental health, as you can see here, could be a breakup, just academic pressure, whether it's perceived academic pressure or real, financial stress, not having enough money to pay for food, to pay for their tuition, trying to juggle the balance of working a job and attending school, just general social relationships, feeling isolated or alone or homesick. This is a really common one with our students, is feeling isolated or alone. And it's really interesting. I feel like this has had a huge uptick since COVID, because we did this huge shift of going remote academically, but also disconnecting from people, right? People are germy, stay away from people, don't let them breathe on you. And so I feel like now as we try to integrate back into more of our functioning where we're around people, or in this space, there's this anxiety attached to interacting with people. I've had a lot of students say to me, it's like, I don't know how to like interact with people anymore. Like, I don't know why a year or two should have made that big of a difference, but I don't know how. And so that's a huge challenge, that students are lonely. They don't want to be lonely, but they don't know how to interact. And so the number of students that I work with that live like in an apartment of 6 individuals, that they like go to school, come home, go to their bedroom and shut the door, right? And they're lonely and they're miserable and they're depressed. And so when we're looking at students that are like doing online, some of these students aren't leaving their room ever, right? If we've gone to like negative mental health. Students that maybe are feeling marginalized or like they don't fit in, if they don't have community or family support, drug or alcohol abuse, time management issues, test anxiety, balancing schoolwork and fun, worries about family at home. This is a common one as well, not only the homesickness, but I have a lot of students that we work with here that maybe have a family member that's unwell at home, whether it be some type of medical illness, substance use disorder, financial issues, interpersonal conflicts within their family unit. So they're here going to school, but there's a level of guilt of what's happening at home and they've left that. Poor sleep behaviors, just generally feeling overwhelmed. And another really common one that we see with our students is concerns regarding identity, gender, or sexuality. And this also could include like religious exploration. Those are some common ones as students move out of their home and they're just figuring out who I am as an individual outside of my family unit. What values do I bring with me? What values do I not? So do you have any other stressors that you see are really common amongst your student population? This is pretty encompassing.
And feel free to take yourself off mute if you'd like to just say those out loud or put them in the chat, and I'll try to monitor the chat for Jamy.
They ask the question again, Jamy.
Yeah, is there anything else that you would add to this list that you see students that you find are really impacting their mental health?
Yeah,
anything additional?
Yeah, I see even with the seniors that I teach, it's the peer pressure. I mean, they're trying to keep up with the Joneses, the other young men and women who are competing for the men and the women.
Yeah.
And they really compete, and it drives them sick sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good example, I believe, as well.
I've noticed a lot in the last year or so. I've got students who are trying to get into a program, a nursing program, a dental hygiene, something like that. And they either are going to have to retake a class or something, and their life plan has been altered and they fall apart. And we have to do a lot of counseling about how it's okay if things get bumped a semester or a year, and retaking a course is okay. But that's incredibly stressful for them in their shoes. I remember it happening to me, but there's a lot of anxiety there, having to redo something and then have a life plan change.
Yeah, I agree with that. Both with what you, Katie, and Shannon are saying is we do have those students that absolutely right, like dental hygiene program, nursing program, getting certain grades to get into a master's program, a post graduation, making sure they have enough internships done to stand out from the crowd, right? So there's like a lot of that pressure. And absolutely, there's this, when we look at society, we have these stepping stones, right? You're 16, you get your driver's license. You're 18, you graduate from high school, right? You're 21 if you choose to, you can drink alcohol. We're like 20, what are we, 18, 19, 22, 23, graduate from college. And if something changes that plan, we don't know how to wrap our heads around it. And that is hard for students, especially they view themselves as being a failure, right? If I didn't pass that class to get the grade I needed to apply for that program, it sets me back a semester, I'm a failure. Versus looking at it as I have an opportunity to take class next semester and reapply. It just is destructive to self-esteem, self-worth. I agree.
I have a couple that I don't see. I've had, just one thing that I don't see is I've had students who've had spiritual crises, questioning religion, their backgrounds, beliefs. In part, my guess would be because of their interaction with other students from other places and different ideas they're learning in the classroom. Lots of students. In fact, I teach creative writing, so I know my students really well through the writing. I teach creative nonfiction. So they're writing memoir, they're writing personal experience narrative. So there's that. And then just kind of since COVID, and maybe even the war in Ukraine, this idea that things are meaningless, larger kind of existential crises where they don't see the meaning of anything or the reason, why should I? Why even bother getting a degree? Global warming, war, pestilence, famine, and I don't know how sometimes to respond. I mean, I'm very honest with my students and I don't have all of the answers. I don't know why we keep going or why we should. I don't know really how to respond to what's the point of it all. Why bother?
Yeah.
It's all coming to an end.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. If I could add to what Cindy just
Please.
said, which I really agree with, just this week, I printed a couple of articles and could have printed a couple more that corporations no longer require bachelor's degrees. And you've all seen that coming out over the years, but it's getting more intense. And the other one was just articles that say, does a bachelor's degree, is a bachelor's degree really needed anymore? So corporations are saying you don't need to have a degree to come to work for us, and then others are saying, hey, is it worth it? Is it needed? That I think that puts anxiety on our kids.
Right. I'm going to spend all this time, effort, and money for something that's pointless, essentially, right? We're rewinding the time when I was going to college. The saying is like a master's is a new bachelor's, right? So you had to get a master's at a minimum to even like kind of exist in the world of like employment. And now we're doing the complete opposite.
Yeah. Now they're saying, get us a certificate or show us competency of skills, and
Yeah.
you're hired.
Yeah. I agree with you both on your statements. Something, Cindy, specifically with what you were saying of everything that's been happening. I've had some students that have come in and they're like, I don't know what happened, but just like all of a sudden, everything felt really, really heavy. And I just feel really depressed and I have no motivation and I don't know what to do. And I think this is pretty common amongst, I I'd say like, I mean, all of our young folks, but really common probably amongst our 18 to like 21, 22-year-olds. And I help these students realize that it's like this putting water in a glass, right? So you are going to college, so we put a little bit of water in the glass. You move in with roommates, we put a little water in the glass. You have roommate conflict, there's a little water in the glass, right? So there's just a little bit of water that goes in the glass with all these kind of experiences. They don't realize water's going in their glass when COVID's happening, and all around them on the news, they're hearing vaccinate, don't vaccinate, mask, don't mask. They're hearing like other adults having conversations about COVID and do I, don't I, right? Kind of a thing. The politics in regards to like a major presidential election and huge disagreements about it, right? Black Lives Matter, protests. There's more that I'm missing here, but the war in Ukraine, gas prices, inflation, housing market, unaffordable cars, you know, like it's kind of like all these things that aren't maybe part of their direct, like maybe they're not car shopping and maybe they're kind of unaware of like what's happening in Ukraine, but they're hearing it all, and it's water that keeps going in their glass, right? And eventually they have something, maybe they fail a test in one of their classes or they don't do as well as they were hoping, and it spills over. And they're like, I don't know why it spilled over because I didn't think anything was going bad. And I feel like with what you're saying, Cindy, I think that's really spot on. Is there's so much that's happened over the last 2 to 3 years that we feel like it's been indirectly like affecting mental health, but it's really directly affecting mental health. It's really, really heavy stuff, plus existing and just doing what I'm supposed to be doing, right? So what's the point? What's the purpose? Why even bother? And that is hard because that's a really common theme. Like, why do anything? Because the world's just gonna like, we're going to nuclear war probably in the next like 2 months. So what are we doing? You know, this is like what people are like, we're having this conversation, and it's really focusing on what we have control over. And I don't have control over a war in Ukraine. I don't have control of like a nuclear war. I don't have control over gas prices, right? But what do I have control over? And that is what I do every single day to help myself be as well as I can, because I do exist in this world. And how can I be well within this world, even though I feel all this chaos going on outside of me? And it's a challenge, absolutely. And another really big one, I don't want to sound ignorant, but it is when we're like, we tell students all the time, disconnect from news, disconnect from social media, like, you know, like disconnect from it because it's so heavy in your brain and you have no control over it. But it's a hard one. And then kind of was what Shan said, these pressures, keeping up with Joneses. Social media, we know, has a huge impact on mental health, specifically with women, more so than men, but it impacts both. But women and self-esteem. The more that a woman spends on a social media, whatever it is, doesn't matter what, social media, they find that they have a significant decline in their mental health, right?
I appreciate, Jamie, that's great. I love the idea of like, what do you have control over? What can you control? Right. I've never said that to a student before, and I shall begin. You know, generally I say, you know, just breathe, take things one step at a time, stay in touch, you know, especially when it comes to schoolwork, to just, you know, take their time. But, you know, that is part of it. What can you control? What assignment can you get done? What, you know, what hours can you work, or whatever it is. So that is really helpful advice. Thank you. Thanks. And I, you know, and I also think about the things that have affected me and my feelings over the last 2 or 3 years. Magnify that by 10, you know, for a young person between the ages of 18 and 22. I mean, I've felt the effects every day, and I do watch the news every night, and it does weigh on me, subconsciously and consciously. So if it's affecting me and I'm an adult, a student or a young person between the ages of 18 and 22, plus all of the kind of drama that, you know, young people experience typically, it magnify that by 10.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it gives somebody like control, right? Power, if they can pick what they really can focus on. And it could be for anything, right? Like we could talk about like global warming and microplastics, and right, we could go on. Well, and there's this like, why are people still using plastic? And what can I do? Well, I can use my glass bottle, right? And that feels so insignificant, but it's something I can do, right? And so it's what are those little things that I have control over can really help create some power and purpose. So when we look at like stressors, which there's tons of them, And here we go to like online learning. And I gear this more towards some, Terry, did you get the notice on there that we're on like a free meeting and we only have 8 minutes remaining?
Yes, but I don't know why we get that notice, but
We're good?
if it does end, go ahead and re-click
Relog in?
the Zoom link, but it shouldn't end. It won't
Okay.
end. So sorry
Okay.
about
You're totally fine. I just want to make sure you saw that too.
that. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So I try to gear this more towards students that are doing online learning. We do know that a lot of the behaviors are the same in class and online remote learning that we might notice. But like I said at the beginning, it's a little bit harder to pick up on some of that body language in regards to a person that's completely online. So one could be if your classroom is requiring like participation, right? Cameras on, mute off, engaging in dialogue, whether it be chat, etc. Somebody maybe just kind of stays tuned out is concerning. What I've had a lot of students do, specifically when we first went remote and they were really struggling with their mental health, would tell me they'd roll out of bed, they log into their Zoom, so they were present, and then they just go back to sleep, right? They just didn't have the mental capacity to get up and participate. So that could be definitely an indicator. We know that poor attendance is an indicator. I know we have the argument, some students say, well, I pay for my education, I don't need to show up to all my classes as long as I get the materials done. But what we find is students that attend classes are generally doing better than students that are missing classes. Failure to turn assignments in, or sending in incomplete assignments, or poor quality work assignments, frequently reporting illness. And that is oftentimes an excuse to get out of doing assignment, or an excuse to have an extension on turning an assignment in. I see that a lot with students here in the center. They'll say, well, I reached out to my professor and I told them I had COVID, or I told them that I was sick, and so I needed more time. But it was really because they were severely depressed and they couldn't get out of bed to do their homework. And they don't want to say, hey, I was severely depressed. So they come up with some other illness that they're reporting. So it's legit in the sense there was an illness. They start being honest for mental health versus physical. Changes in appearance. So maybe if you notice your student is showing up and turn their camera on, but you're noticing a change in their appearance, the way they're looking, looks like they're not showering, they're not getting ready. Maybe their space around them, if they're in their room, it's really messy, disorganized. Low motivation. Once again, that kind of goes back to just like not really participating or not really submitting work that you feel like is at their capacity. They may report they're struggling with their mental health. That's another one, is some students may reach out to you and say, I am having a hard time, or I am struggling with my mental health, or I'm having a lot of anxiety. I'm seeking mental health services. So there might be a direct report. Could be increased irritability or agitation in the classroom. So maybe they seem to be a little bit shorter or snappier with their peers, whether it be verbally or through chat. Really struggling with decision making. And this is, I think, an important one as well, because we oftentimes think of isolation and disconnecting as like a warning sign. But the next one here is dependency on a professor or an advisor. Constantly needing to reach out, constantly needing reassurance, constantly needing validation. Constantly following up with like messages about, am I doing this right, or how do I do this, or right. So there's this over dependency. Could also be an over dependency in regards to reaching out to you about their mental health struggles. Reaction with apathy. So just really they're not for the topic at hand, right? So they're just not really engaged. And this is what you hear, Cindy, you do English reflection of mental health struggles in writing. That's really common that we see that they use that as an avenue to really share what's going on. It could be, I have students in like psychology courses. They may do that in some of their assignments where we've had psychology professors reach out to us and say, hey, this was something their student self-diagnosing in an assignment.
That's exactly, that was something else I wanted to bring up. I mean, with the information highway, the tentacle that reaches right into their hand, essentially, a lot of students do self-diagnose without getting any diagnosis from a professional, without seeking any mental health help at all. And that in some ways is kind of equally dangerous, almost like a self-fulfilling diagnosis. I have depression, I have anxiety, or I have dyslexia or another kind of learning disability that they have not been diagnosed with. Does that make sense to you? Like where it's self-fulfilling?
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I actually had a student in here this week that came in and said, I'm pretty sure I have dissociative personality disorder. And that's like multiple personality disorders where people like very clearly dress differently, talk differently, behave differently, and it's very uncommon, but it does exist. And I was like, what, where did you come up with this idea? Like, why all of a sudden do you have dissociative personality disorder? He's like, well, I looked it up this morning because I was trying to like Google my symptoms and I think that's what I have. And I said, okay, I haven't done a clinical assessment on you, but based upon everything you've told me, I don't think you have dissociative personality disorder, like not even kind of. He was having feelings of like detachment from reality, racing heart, sometimes feeling like he wasn't present in the room. This is all an anxiety-like symptomology, not a dissociative, right? So now there's this anxiety set in that I have this major mental health disorder that I just diagnosed myself with. And so it feeds into that, like funnels in there. So yeah, that's really common. And we have students that'll come in as well, Sydney, and all they'll say, yeah, same thing. I have depression, I have anxiety, where they don't meet the criteria. They're just having stress and they're feeling overwhelmed, or they're having feelings of sadness, which is really normal to feel sad at times. But it's self-fulfilling if I can put a label on it.
No, and I think, students maybe don't have the tools to deal with some of just the normal stresses of everyday life of being an adult or being a student and an employee and work 40 hours a week. Haven't maybe learned the coping skills necessary to juggle and keep all of those balls in the air. And I don't know how I can help them necessarily with that.
I agree. What we've seen is, so we know that mental health has been declining across all all ages. Why, right? There's the big why, but we have a huge decline in our youth mental health. And there is some research, right, showing that the impact of social media, but also there's if you've heard the term like lawnmower parent or helicopter parent, right? So we have this generation.
I didn't want to say that, but yes.
Right. So we have a generation of parents that love their children more than anything, but they also try to maybe do what they didn't have or parent the way they weren't parented. And they try to alleviate, right, like all barriers and all discomforts from their child. It is better to have challenges and feel uncomfortable when you're a teenager and figure out how to get good coping skills and manage those than become a young adult and have no coping skills because everything has been taken care of for you, right? But now we throw you into the world and you haven't had an opportunity really to develop these skills. And so it's hard because parents that engage in the helicopter / lawnmowing parenting, it really is, they love their children, but they are also doing a disservice to their children because they aren't able to fall and fail and learn to how to overcome falling and failing. That's part of growth, is failing, right? And so if we don't ever fail, we hit college and we hit barriers. That's devastating when we fail because we've not experienced that before. Kind of a side plug here, we along with Southwest Behavioral Health, we haven't read your Dixie announced yet today, but Southwest Behavioral Health is wonderfully paying for Lenore Skanaski, if I'm saying her last name properly. But what she was doing, what Lenore was doing is she couldn't take her child to school every day, something along those lines. So she taught her child how to ride the subway to get to their school. Well, I guess she was reported to Child Protective Services, something along those lines, for being a negligent parent. And for her, she really pushed back because she says, I'm not being a negligent parent. I taught my child how to do something, right? To be independent, how to be safe. They're totally capable, but because of cultural shift, right? Parenting shift, was being viewed as being negligent. And so she really pushed back. And from that, she created a foundation. She's a motivational speaker and really empowering parents to help their children be resilient. And we allow them to be resilient by like how we parent them. So if you're available on the 26th, that's happening. It's going to be a really good speaker event. Side note. This is just a little bit more in regards to like a mental health condition. This is like kind of all encompassing, right? This is not the DSM diagnostic criteria for one specific, but just so we can kind of look at like maybe some behaviors that are looking more towards a mental health disorder. So if a student is exhibiting sadness or being withdrawn for more than a couple weeks, severe out of control risk-taking behaviors, it's impulsive behaviors like, right, excessive spending, drug use, alcohol use, sexual behaviors, pornography viewing, sudden and overwhelming fear for no reason, not eating, throwing up, using laxatives, seeing, hearing, or believing things that are not real. Move this out of the way so you can see these. Drastic changes in their mood or behavior, sleep patterns, habits, difficulty concentrating or staying still. Another one, kind of, right? Every student has ADHD that struggles with concentration. Not every student has ADHD, right? But it's kind of a self-diagnosis. It's that we have to have good test taking skills or good study skills, and that will help you be more successful. Intense worry or fears that get in the way of daily activities or trying to harm oneself or planning to do so. So these are some more direct signs of a mental health disorder, but this is not one specific mental health disorder. There's depression in here, there's anxiety in here, there's schizophrenia in here, there's disordered eating in here. So some things that we really promote our students to do to help them be successful in college is really self-care. So self-care does not override a mental health disorder, but it can help them maintain if they're doing okay. It can help them if they're struggling to kind of get back on track. So we just really encourage student connection on campus. We know that students are connected to campus activities and campus events are more likely to retain and have a better collegiate experience. And so it's just really promotion of that. I know, you know, I would say, like, historically in the past, there's been this disconnect between academics and like student affairs, right? And not necessarily what the purpose of student affairs is, but right, kind of the side note, what's the purpose of student affairs? And it is these student affairs activities, essentially, if we can get our students connected to these, the outcome is gonna be positive in your classroom. And so something that I encourage professors to do is that if you know something that's going on campus, right, is just doing a quick, like, hey, this is happening on campus this week, and encouraging students to participate would be a good way to connect them to these. Getting enough, having students get enough sleep, physical activity, eating healthy, avoiding substance use, practicing mindfulness meditation, managing their time, and creating to-do lists and tackle items one at a time. So with this is how as an instructor can you do this? What I like is just like a check-in, right? So here I'm teaching English, or I'm teaching math, or I'm teaching science, whatever it may be. Just a quick check-in. Maybe something was really heavy, that there was a really hard test last week, and maybe a lot of students didn't do very well, or there's something big coming up. The check-in is reminding students, hey, remember that getting enough sleep, eating healthy, not abusing substances is going to help you be successful, right? Or if you find that you're really struggling, we have resources for you, and I'll go over those in a minute, but we have resources available for you. That was me with my death and dying course. That was my initial announcement, right? More or less, this is a really heavy subject. We're going to learn a lot, but it's going to bring up a lot of feelings. If you find that you're really struggling with any of the concepts within this, we have these resources available for you, right? And then I have done a check-in throughout the semester. We've had something more of a heavy topic, right? I do a check back in. Hey, I know this last week we had really kind of a heavy discussion. If anybody finds that they're struggling, please reach out. And I've had students that have done that they've responded, right? Once again, death and dying. So I've had a student reach out and they're like, this topic is like really hard for me. I'm really struggling. I don't even like to think about death, right? And so do we need to refer you to a resource, or are you okay just to maintain in class and just know that it's difficult for you? So we're not out of line as being instructors, as faculty. You're not out of line to touch base with your students in regards to their mental health, right? It's not you have to have a whole class on mental health. It's not that you have to be your student's mental health therapist, but just letting them know. And what happens in that is what we find is the professors that let students know about mental health and resources, when a student is struggling, they're more likely to reach out to you because they feel comfortable, because you've already made that an open topic. So they may come back out to you later on and say, hey, Jordan, I know like a few weeks ago you had mentioned that if we were having a hard time, there were some resources. Can you remind me what those are? Right? And it's just that we've created this culture of like awareness of mental health. So I really encourage that. Yeah, Terry.
Jamie, when I was a professor at a university in the South, I would invite the person who had the equivalent position that you do to be a guest speaker in each of my classes every semester, just to remind them of those self-care behaviors. And by the way, I love also the tip for faculty to remind students about the campus activities, but you can invite guest speakers in, and like Jamy. What, although I don't want to necessarily add to your plate, Jamy, but it's just a wonderful thing for students because it's not just you as the professor, but it's also another expert coming in to say, hey, these are some things you can do. Give them those reminders that to help them practice self-care.
Yeah, thank you for that, Terry. We do that. So initially what we were doing when I first started is we were getting invited into the SSE or the Trailblazer Connection courses. And we were doing that. And what we found that we ended up not having capacity because there were so many SSE courses. And Jim Hendage's changed like how that course is being ran. And so we actually have a module that we created, a really nice PowerPoint module with teaching points for faculty. So in that, like on week 6 in the SSE course, then they can teach that information. So all of our freshmen are getting targeted with various like topics that are helping with their mental health or services. So I think that's awesome. And then adding to that, absolutely, we do classroom presentations. And so I already had a professor reach out to me for fall semester. They wanted me to come into one of their classes and talk about just kind of like stressors and anxiety that happen in college, right, on my schedule. And so we can come in and talk about like stressors. We can talk about like coping techniques. We can talk about time management, interpersonal relationships. I mean, really anything that we just come in and talk about our services and just put a face to like our services. So that is something that we are capable and more than willing to come and do, even if it's for like 10, 15 minutes. I've had also one day, one of our faculty had a sudden thing that came up that they had to go to, and they didn't want to cancel their class. And it worked out that we were able to go over there and fill their class time with the presentation on wellness. So, yeah. And then go ahead.
Go consider the online classroom. Certainly you could have a synchronous event where you have you as a guest speaker. But what about if it's a totally asynchronous online course? Any ideas for online faculty to get that information as well to their students?
Yeah, so we do have like next week, our MSW intern, she's going to be doing an anxiety informational workshop for an online course. So for a group online, I guess I should say, not an online course, but for a group online. So we can do that as well online. So we'll do that, not a problem. We can do that. We also offer QPR. So we have a lot of our faculty that do QPR training themselves or their departments do, but also we do QPR training for all of our Utah Health Scholars. We do it for our nursing program. And then we get invited into different classrooms on campus. The psychology department, they invite us into one of their classes, like the abnormal psych. So we can come and do QPR training if it ever aligns with what you want to do. I'm doing extra credit next week. I'm teaching a QPR training for all of campus, but I'm giving extra credit for students in my course to attend that QPR training. So we can do that for you too.
Just a reminder that the QPR training is the suicide prevention training.
Oh, thank you. Yep. Suicide awareness prevention training. It's evidence-based, it's nationally recognized, and you do get certification for 3 years. Any questions? I was going to go into just some of our resources now, just in the interest of our time. Does anybody have anything before I move into that? So here's my thing. I want to empower you that if you notice a student is meeting any of those like warning signs, if they're exhibiting a warning sign, don't hesitate to reach out to them. Right? Sometimes there's this like, is that my space? Should I say anything? And that could just be, hey, student A, I've noticed that you've been missing a lot of classes and haven't turned in some of your assignments. I wanted to check in with you and see how you're doing. I've been feeling a little bit worried about you, right? They might just say, yeah, I've been working too much. School's not been my priority. Or they might say, yeah, I'm really struggling. I'm having a hard time, right? And then that's when we can do that resource referral. So there's nothing wrong with doing that direct reach out to them. Hey, I've noticed you haven't been in classes for like the last month, right? Can we talk about what's going on?
By the way, that is so powerful to have a teacher reach out to you to say, hey, I've noticed this, that you haven't participated or you haven't submitted the last assignment. And I've missed you, just want to check in to see how you're doing. What a powerful question that is for students. I've had students respond back that meant a lot to them. It may help them realize that somebody cared, that there wasn't just a professor that they never saw, but someone actually expressed caring for them. That was very powerful.
I like that, Terry. And that's a lot of our students that, I mean, whether or not they're suicidal or not, right? It's gonna be powerful for any of them because somebody sees me and somebody cares about me. Specifically for our students that are really struggling with their mental health or even having suicidal ideation, they feel invisible to the world and they feel like nobody cares about them, right? And so for you to do that, you honestly could save their life. And I know that sounds like dramatic, but I'm not kidding. You could save their life because maybe they feel so invisible that what's my purpose of existing in this world anymore. And then Terry reached out to me and I was like, oh, I'm not quite so invisible, right? That felt good that somebody noticed me, that somebody saw me. So yeah, empowering you to do that, to reach out to your students. Doesn't mean you have to babysit their mental health, right? But it just means that I see you, I care about you, I know you're supposed to be in my class, and I can see that something's going on, right?
I've shared this with many of you before, but I'll share it again right now. And that is that in class, when a student doesn't show up to class, I do take roll every day for every class. If a student doesn't show up, we have a student text them right then in class at the time I'm taking roll that says, we're missing you in class. Are you okay? It's just that. And then when I get back to my office, I send them a personal text. And that's just a habit now after every class. And then when they don't submit an assignment, I send them a message that says this assignment was not submitted. And I welcome your comments. So those are two things I certainly agree with. And that's the quick way I do it and keep on top of it.
Yeah. I really like that, Shannon. I think it's a fantastic thing to do. I know it's a juggle, right? A lot of you have probably a lot of classes and a lot of students, and I know that's like extra work, but I think it's important that we do this extra work, especially knowing what we know about like mental health and the crisis that we're experiencing, right? So we want to help retain these students within our academics. We do have to do these extra things to help make sure that they're okay. There's always obviously appropriate boundaries, right? And I don't think that's overstepping boundaries at all, right? If a student is constantly coming into you and they're utilizing you and your time and your space where you're like, okay, like I don't have time to do this. That does happen. We've had situations like that where it's okay to, say, hey, I want to help get you connected to a service, right? Let's get you connected to the Booth Wellness Center. Don't feel like you're abandoning the student by passing them off to us, because we also recognize you have to respect your time and like your capacity as well. So, if a student
Jamy,
yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I have a question. So I have some family members who have recently been suicidal, and so this has been weighing on my mind a lot. But one of my questions that I haven't really found a great answer to, and I don't know that there is one, but once the initial knowledge is there that they have been suicidal or they've made an attempt or they're struggling, what's the long-term plan? Or because it's likely that'll come again and will happen again, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess my question is, how do you keep yourself from being in constant anxiety that someone's going to take their own life? And then what's the long-term plan from there on out to help them once you've given them the immediate resources? Is it therapy? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's Jordan, thank you for bringing that up. And that is a hard one, right? Because that is a normal response, is feeling anxious, right? I care about you, I love you, you're important to me, and you've had suicidal thoughts or you've had a suicide attempt. And how do I not feel anxious about that potentially happening again? Really, it creates like in some situations like a PTSD response, like it's a trauma response, right? Now we have fear attached to it. So the number one thing is reminding us, come back to the control. I don't have control over whether or not a person takes their life or not, but I do have control over what I can do to help connect to them to resources and help, right? And so it's looking at, what do I have control over? So an individual, if a person is ever like in an imminent risk of self-harm, suicide, they've ingested substances, they've sent you a text message and then they ghosted you, went dark on you, and you can't, get a hold of them. If they're threatening, I'm going to shoot myself, anything that's really imminent, we're calling 911, right? We want to have medical intervention. And you can always ask what is called a CIT officer to respond. That's a crisis intervention trained officer. And that's, if you remember, I always encourage people to ask for that, just because we want to make sure that we have something that potentially could help de-escalate the situation, right? Because that's a fear sometimes. Do we call the police, or is my family member or my friend going to die by suicide by cop, right? And that is a fear that people experience. And so you can ask for a CIT trained officer. If the person is saying, I'm feeling suicidal, I don't know if I can keep myself safe, but it's not like an imminent, right, 911 call to get EMS there. We have the access center at the hospital on the 4th floor. You can self-check into that 24 hours a day, and you'll get connected to mental health and medical professionals to at least help keep you safe and then discharge you out with a plan for continued treatment. For students, don't transport a student there. That's against university policy, so don't give a student a ride. If you have a student that you feel like needs that service, you would call dispatch and ask them to have a campus police officer to come to your office, let's say, and then campus police will give them a ride to the hospital. That's what we do here, is if we have a student, we have to go to the hospital, we'll just call dispatch and I'll just say, this is Jamie at the Booth Wellness Center. I need to have a Dixie State campus police officer, one of them, come to my office. I don't need an ambulance. I don't need a fire truck. I don't need lights and sirens. I just need an officer to come to my office. And they show up and they'll get the student a ride. So that's a really good resource. Getting them connected, if it's not imminent risk, right? They're just really struggling with their mental health. They've had suicidal thoughts intermittently, is just one, helping getting them connect to that resource. So we do offer free mental health counseling here at the Wellness Center. We offer free crisis consultation. So we have that as well. If a student is in an imminent crisis, they can come over to our office and we'll have them see a provider. If it's a family member, right, getting them connected to a community resource that can help them. And then there's the follow-up with it, right? So let's say I've referred me to a resource. I've got them connected to that resource. That is saying to your student, hey, I know last week you said you had an appointment with the Booth Wellness Center. I'm just curious, were you able to make it? How did that go? Oh, you canceled it because you were too busy? Well, would you like to get it rescheduled? I can help you call to get that rescheduled, or do you want me to get the number for you again, right? So it's just doing follow-up with friends or family, Jordan. It's just that follow-up. Hey, I really care. And this is part of like QPR training, the suicide prevention training, is verbalizing to them what you want them to know if they had died, right? So if my best friend or my partner or my parent or my sibling died by suicide, what would I have wanted them to know when they were alive? So an example would be, say one of those people are struggling. It's saying to them, it's having that conversation. I really love you. I really care about you. I do not want you to die. And it's being open about that, right? Let them see that fear that you have of them dying. Let them see that they're important to you. And because I think what we do is we sometimes don't show our emotions because we don't want to trigger that person that's maybe struggling with mental health. They need to see that. And so, yeah, absolutely. Friends and family, people like that is, I don't want you to die. You're important to me. I'm here to help you and I'm here to help you get through this. What can we do together? Does that help answer a little bit, Jordan?
Sorry, I couldn't find my mouse for a second.
You're
Yeah,
fine.
that does help. That does help. And I think that helps in the initial like knowing and the immediate urgent need. But I guess part of my question too is long term, and it sounds like that may be different for each person what the long term plan is as far as therapy and everything else. But
yeah, it's really dependent upon the person long term, right? It's does a person that's been suicidal need to be in therapy forever? No, right? We know that there is hope, and we know that people can get stabilized in regards to a mental health crisis. Some people need to go therapy intensively for a while. Some people need to go intermittently for a while. Some people need medication management, right? Some people need hospitalization, and it's really dependent upon the person and their unique circumstances. But what I encourage for friends and family members, et cetera, is you also can do therapy, and that can help you through that process of how do I help someone? Because that's heavy, right? Like as you're identifying, that creates anxiety. So how do I be okay, right, with this going on in my life? And so we also can access therapy services for ourselves. And so I think that's important, and that could be a beneficial thing too. So, but yeah, it is really unique to the individual, to the person, and that's hard, right? Like when do we know that they're kind of okay, they don't have to have that fear anymore? And honestly, that fear probably will never go away. And I know that's not the best answer, but that's what I hear from people, is that once that's happened and I felt that fear and that felt so real to me, it's hard to make that leave because I care about you and that was so real in that moment. So it is hard. So it's how do I live with having that kind of fear existing within me to be okay myself.
thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. So just reminder, we offer free mental health services for students. We offer some workshops for our students. We offer a depression workshop, which is a 3-week workshop, an anxiety workshop, 3-week workshop. All of our workshops are free. All of our groups are free, and all of our therapy is free. couple of important resources I think for faculty and staff to be aware of is if you have a student that you're really concerned about, you can't reach them, they're not responding to you, you can make a report to the Dean of Students. So you can send a message over there and they can follow up with the student. So that's a really good tool. Another option is the Safe UT app. This one is you actually, and you all can use this personally. You can give this information to your students, but you can get connected to a mental health professional 24/7 at the University of Utah Hospital, free, confidential. And so if it's like an imminent crisis, they're going to help get that person help, or they're going to help talk you through how to get that person help. If it's not imminent crisis, but they just need, you need some therapy services, essentially, it's a text portal. So you can text back and forth with therapists as much as you need to. And, you can stop your conversation, go back to it in 4 days from now, stop your conversation, reach out again in 4 months from now. So that's a great resource. Another thing you can do on that app is you can report a concern. And we have a lot of students that do this, where they'll go in there, they can actually select their university, Dixie State University, and they will put all the information in there. So it can be for anything. I've had substance use, eating disorders, sexual assault, suicidal ideation, right? So student A goes in there and says, my roommate, John Smith, I think has an eating disorder. This is what's happening. And then what that does is it dumps into my portal, Dean Threat's portal, and our director's portal. And we all get that alert and we can review that. And then we get the appropriate person on campus to reach out to that student, right? Usually it's Dean of Students will call that student in and say, hey, we've had somebody report some concerns about you. How can we help you? And so if you have a student, you can use the Dean of Student report, or you can also use this free app. And this is actually available for all universities and high schools in the state of Utah. So it's pretty cool. And then we have some other crisis lines that you can always refer students to. And that is the end of that. Just open it up. Maybe does anybody else have any questions or thoughts? If not, that's okay too.
Jamie, I might share my screen as well for a minute, just to show that we do have a list of resources for online that we'll be giving to all new faculty. And I can make this available on our DSU online webpage, which is online.dixie.edu. We will be making this available, I'm sure, for faculty as you're on the front lines, and so you're the one that sees that the student needs the first aid. It's not your responsibility, as Jamie mentioned, to take them to the hospital. We don't do that, but we can certainly connect them to the resources that they need. And I so appreciated this presentation for that important message, is what resources are available and how can we connect our students to those resources. So I appreciate that. But so I'll try to make this available and communicate when this is online, so you can see that. But if any of you want to request that now, I can send a copy to you as well.
I think that's wonderful, Terry, because it is sometimes students don't know where they need to go. We even have students end up here for like a mental health appointment, and I'm like, you don't need me, you need your academic advisor, right? And so we have students that, or they end up here and I'm like, you don't need me, you need the Disability Resource Center. And so they just don't know. And so if we know, then we can get them connected to that resource.
Yeah.
And it's nice to be able to get them directly connected to that resource.
I've got a bell now for another meeting. It's our College of Business meeting. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks all.
Of course, thank you for joining.
Yep.
And thank you all. We understand if you need to leave.
Yep.
Jamie and I will stay in the Zoom meeting room for a few minutes if you have any particular questions. And Jamie, thank you so much. We certainly appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise with us. And if anyone has any questions, they can stay on the line or even contact you directly, I assume, right?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions as well, you're more than welcome to send me an email. You're welcome to call over here. It is not uncommon for us to have a faculty or staff call or email us and say, hey, this is a situation, I don't know what to do. We actually had it recently. I wasn't the one that took the phone call, but we had a professor call over and there was concern about, I think, an email that a student had sent to this professor. They called over here and said, this is what the email said. I'm not quite sure what I should do, but I'm feeling pretty concerned about the student. Our nurse was the one that actually took that phone call because she was the one that answered the phone. And she was able to talk this faculty through the next steps. And it actually was that they needed to call the police, campus police. And so she talked them through, this is the number you're going to call, this is what you're going to say. And the faculty was like, well, can you do it? Right. And we don't be the middleman on that because you're the one with the direct knowledge. So we're going to help talk you through how to do that. So if you're in a situation like that, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Great. Thank you. So nice to know that
Thank you.
faculty and staff, we have that resource.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I'm fine staying on. I'm not running away.
Thank you so much. I'll stop the recording and we'll thank you. And we'll
Sure.
again stay in the room for just a few more minutes. So thank you so much, Jamy.